She has published several research papers and articles in journals and chapters in books, including 2 publications in UGC care listed journals and an individual book titled The Rose Blooms, a study of Alfred Rose's lyrics. As a reviewer, she has several book reviews published in journals such as Muse India and RLJ and so on. She has also translated stories from Konkani to English. Presently, Dr. Mendonça is the executive committee member of the Delgado Konkani Academy and is a part of several activities in the promotion of Konkani language and literature. She is passionate about singing, Goan music, theatre, and translates from Konkani into English. The next presenter, Ms. Salima Kothare, is an educational consultant devoted to education and passionate about the potential and impact of training and development of students' skills and aptitude. She is a research scholar and an amateur translator interested mainly in English as a target language with Konkani and Hindi as the source language. Ms. Rama Murkunde is an assistant professor in the Department of Konkani, Goa University. She has been a teacher for the last 17 years and has contributed to the genre of children's literature and has published her own collection of short stories titled Tanucho Kanyo. She has also translated a Sahitya Academy winning book titled Nirbuddhito Ras Karbar from Hindi to Konkani in the year 2015. Ms. Murkunde has translated several children's stories such as Bakt Salibaga, Tanit Melta Tenna Namaskar Karat, Ekidis, and so on in Konkani on behalf of NBT. She has published research papers on several topics as well. In order to incite an interest of translation in students, as well as give them a knowledge about translation, she has also organized several workshops. In fact, her PhD thesis, which she has recently defended, is based on linguistic-based study of the development of Konkani fiction and novel, which she has done in Goa University. The next presenter for this session is Ms. Rochelle Fernandes, an assistant professor in the Department of English, Dhempe College of Arts and Science, Miramar, Goa. She's passionate about curriculum design and has curated several short-term courses that bridge the gap in the curriculum. She is pursuing a part-time PhD at BITS Pilani, KK Villa, Goa campus in the area of culture studies and Goan historical and literary studies. She has edited the 5th edition of the acclaimed novel Sorrowing Lies My Land, authored by the late Lambert Mascarenhas.
परते सेशनाक तुमकां सगळ्यांक परत एकदा येवकार. विशयच असो आसा ट्रान्सलेशन इन लिटरेचर थियोरी एंड प्रॅक्सीस. कोणाक न्ही दिवपाक शक्यताच ना, कारण विशयच असो आसा की हें नवीन तें नवीन, अरे हें म्हाका खबर नाशिल्लें असलें जातलें. पण विशय इंट्रस्टींग आसा म्हणून कांय नेम हांव म्हज्या सहकाऱ्यांक घालून दितां. म्हाका खबर आसा तुमकां 15 मिनटां दिल्ली सगळ्यांक, बट नाव इट इज गोइंग टू बी 12 minutes, 8 to 12 minutes each, and audience only 4 questions विधाना नाका, सजेशन्स असल्यार जाता, बट केन्ना तरी कितें केल्लें बी त्यो स्टोरी नाका, बिकॉज वी डू नॉट हॅव टायम. सो 12 प्रेक्षकांक सगळ्यांक 12 मिनटां, तुमकां 12 मिनटां, म्हाका 10 मिनटां. I think in that 2:15 to 3:30 we should be able to complete and wind up our session. Basically what I'm going to do is let the paper presenters present the papers, and then in the end I will sum up. I won't speak in between. Yeah? Is that okay? So I invite Dr. Glenis Mendonça to start her presentation. We have 2 presentations which are PPT and 2 sessions which are presentations without PPT. So we are equal.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Ma'am Prashanti, for those introductory comments. I plunge headlong into my paper, and that is titled Theories of Translation Studies, Historical Trends and Perspectives. Now, translation studies, we are looking at theories here. And why do we need theories? Because theories provide us a frame in order to undertake the praxis. Translation studies as a term was popularized first by James S. Holmes in 1972. Why theories? Why do we need theories? We need theories because theories give us a kind of a framework to ignite our ideas and thoughts and motivate us towards the praxis. They give us some background. They give us some inspiration. So is there a complete theory of translation? Louis Kelly opines that a complete theory of translation has three components. One is the specification of function or the goal. Secondly, the description of its operation. How does it operate? And thirdly, a critical comment on the relationship between the goal and the operations. So this is the purpose of theory, and very rarely does a theory completely go by all three. Sometimes there is a specification of a goal, but the operation is lacking or something goes amiss. So in a complete theory, all these 3 points, says Louis Kelly, should be prevalent. Let us start historically on understanding the whole idea of translation and how it evolved, especially in the Western context. We have the Roman influence. 3000 BC is where we can place our finger on historically. The Rosetta Stone, 2nd century BC. That is where translation was first seen. 300 BC, Romans started translating Greek texts. Homer's Odyssey was translated by Andronicus. There were other scholars, philosophers like Quintilian, Cicero, Horace, younger Pliny, who gave inputs to understand the different problems of translation. It is here, under the Roman influence, that the distinction between word-for-word translation and a sensible modus for translation was put out or put across. Later on, we had the biblical translation. Sometimes it's also known as hermeneutics. Now, the Bible is considered to be the most and widely translated text, and there were a lot of issues related to biblical translation, because initially the translation of Bible was to follow the letter and not the spirit. The A.D. Aquila in 2nd century A.D. made a literal translation of the Hebrew Old Testament into Greek. And the New Testament was translated into several languages such as Syrian, Latin, Gothic, Armenian. Saint Jerome is known to have translated the New Testament into Latin. And for the first time, there was a problem with biblical translation, that it had to be word to word. And we know the problems of word to word translation. And a lot of beautiful poetry in Songs of Songs in the Old Testament, which has to be translated. And when you translate it from something like Hebrew to Latin, there are problems which arise, particularly poetic translation. And here they were not allowed to do a sensible translation. It was Saint Jerome in the New Testament who translated the New Testament in a very bohemian way. And for this he was a martyr, he was burnt. Okay, biblical translation was marked by fear, because if you translate it in the wrong manner, it was very sacrosanct. The entire enterprise was so sacrosanct. There were dogmas to be upheld. The interpretation had to be linguistically, aesthetically, culturally sacrosanct, and it had to be kept intact in the target language, and hence there were a lot of issues concerning biblical translation. It's an entire chapter by itself when we undertake the whole issue of biblical translation. In the Middle Ages, there was a promotion of in the realm of education, because Middle Ages focus on translation to enhance education, to enhance imaginative powers, to enhance oratory. Latin paved the way to other regional languages, vernacular languages, through translational engagements. There were two kinds of translation. One would see the vertical translation and the horizontal translation. And here again, translation was a skill which was linked to the modes of reading and interpreting the original text. When we look at the 16th century, this is the period of the Renaissance, the Shakespearean age. The invention of the printing press made translation a very prolific activity. The French humanist Etienne Dole in 1509-46 was the first to formulate a theory of translation in his text, How to Translate Well from One Language into Another. So here we see the seeds of the theories of translation being instilled. Chapman translated Homer's works during this time. There is a poem called On First Entering into Chapman's Homer. Translation played a key role in Renaissance Europe to disseminate languages, and translation was a key player here to have that new learning which Renaissance so well emblematizes. The translator here was a revolutionary activity, and that's where the critic Steiner comes up with the enterprise of translation, which he calls as reconstruction through the enterprise of translation, wherein the translator becomes very original and engages in a very creative exercise. In the 17th century, we have critics like Cowley, 1618 to 67, who argues for freedom in translation. We have John Dryden, 1631, 1700, who talks about metaphrase, paraphrase, and imitation. Metaphrase, word to word, paraphrase, summarizing, and imitation, trying to blend the two. And then we have Alexander Pope, 1688, 1744, the famous author of Rape of the Law, who says both metaphrase and paraphrase are not adequate. He says that there is a need for a balance in translation. You cannot straitjacket, theoretic ideas when we actually practically undertake the enterprise of translation, is what Alexander Pope opined. Later on, during the Romantic period and the post-Romantic and Victorian age, translation had varied ramifications. Romantic age highly regarded imagination. We have Coleridge's famous dictum of imagination vis-a-vis fantasy. Most of the literature students have studied this. Post-Romantic age, we have Dante Rossetti, translation displaying fidelity, faithfulness in the form of the source text and the source language, that it has to be faithfully brought into the target text. Frederick Schleiermacher in 1768, who lived between 1768 and 1834, suggests creation of a separate sub-language to be used in translation. During the Victorian age, Arnold translated Homer. Focus is on literalness, archaizing, formalism, creation of translated text for an elite minority, because that is what the Victorian age, the age of Queen Victoria, symbolizes. Translation here was very erudite, scholarly, getting the target text reader closer to the source language and source text. Translation was a very pedantic exercise meant for a few erudite ones. And now is the main age that we are coming, the 20th century, which is celebrated as, it was the age wherein translation flowered. Age of translation, or can we call it the age of transition? Because it is taking a U-turn from what we earlier had in terms of theoretic knowledge of translation. Here we have the development of communication theory, structural linguistics, onset of machine translation. We call it MT for short. We have Lawrence Venuti, who writes a beautiful work called the Translation Studies Reader 2000. He published it in the year 2000. Now, this is a book which is like the Bible of translation studies students, the translation studies reader. It has all the ideas the theories which came across during the 20th century. Ezra Pound put across the German interest in experimentalism and creativity. In the 1920s, the dictum was spurn the letter, follow the spirit. Go by the spirit of the source text in the target text, and do not look at the literalness. Spanish translator Jose Ortega Gasset in the 1930s put across the idea that the translator should overcome difficulties through their creativity. And that's what we were discussing in the morning. You use your creative quotient, your CQ, and overcome the difficulties which most translators face. In 1940s and 50s, the focus was on translatability. The various methods which were formulated were trying to identify and overcome obstacles in translation. Roma Jakobsen on linguistic aspects of translation, had a work by this name in 1959, and he introduces this whole concept of creative transposition, particularly in poetic translation. We know how poetic translation is the most difficult where, Sahityik Anuvad is concerned. To continue with 20th century, in the 1960s and 70s, there's a focus on the term equivalence. Now, this is a very famous term where translation studies is concerned, a very popular term, which means sameness. You have to find the equivalent word, the same word, sameness. And this established a relationship with the TT. TT is the target text. J.C. Catford, Eugene Nida, Peter Newmark, these are very significant contributors to translation theories. Catford put off the common idea that translates from the source text to the target text. That is the idea which Catford had. But he also spoke about something known as translational shifts in his work, which he authored in 1965. Now, Nida's concept is very popular. He calls, the twin ideas of formal correspondence and dynamic equivalence. Word to word, sense to sense. That's all it means. Word to word translation, formal correspondence, dynamic equivalence is that you have to make sense. It's not, you just cannot say, dal mein kuch kala hai, there's something black in the lentils. You have to find an equivalent. There's something fishy. You cannot be word to word in certain cases. Peter Newmark in 1979 speaks about 11 types of translation, and due to paucity of time, I'm not going through them. Julian House's covert versus overt translation is another very interesting concept. Anton Popovich's functional faithfulness put across in 1970 is worthy of consideration. Gilles Levy's pragmatic translation again is an important term. Now you may jot down these terms and you can Google and get more information about them. Now most significant was in the 1970s, wherein Zohar and Turi, I gave their full names there, spoke about a polysystem theory, a theory wherein they said that translation is not about sameness, equivalence, translatability merely, but there is a complex system. There are different veins and arteries and levels and different, layers of meanings and different aspects, and they use the term polysystem, these twin theories. Susan Bassett's translation studies is a landmark work in the 1980s and elevates the status of translation. Bassett has other works as well. Zohar and Turi's idea of translation as a refraction as opposed to reflection is another idea worthy of consideration. So there are several other scholars and translators who give varied perspectives. We have Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak. The Politics of Translation is one of her famous essays, wherein she talks about the feminist intervention into the post-colonial translational matters. There is Hatim and Mason's Politeness in Screen Translation. Can we see how we are going towards digital translation slowly? Screen translation, wherein he's talking about film translation, subtitling, and other aspects related to screen translation. In 1990s, we have queer radicalism, gay sensibility, camp talk. Keith Harvey's article, Translating Camp Talk, Gay Identities and Cultural Transfer. See how ideas are changing and they are progressing in the 20th century. Besides that, there are other theories like 1990s Mona Baker, Sara Labiosa, who talk about translation in the digital technology. Lawrence Venuti, who talks about the different aspects in the new era, the translator's invisibility. The translator has to be invisible if you want to give out a good translation. 1995, and the different scandals of translation, which he outlines in a work with the same title in 1998. The most popular in the present century, that we are living in, is Anthony Pym and his work, Exploring Translation Theories. 2010 is a must-read for scholars of translation studies because it's more recent, and there he has different essays wherein he is exploring translation studies in the new millennium. Now, today in the era of artificial intelligence, translation and translation theories, we are looking at new possibilities and continue to forge ahead with a fresh vision. We already have the theory of the Sir talked about the consuming theory, the cannibalistic theory. It's a Brazilian theory. Okay, it originated in Brazilian context, and again that is a new idea which came across in the new millennium. So different ideas are. This is only in the Western context. In the Indian context, ma'am, this is just 30 seconds, so not even a minute. I'll give you a brief peek into Indian translation consciousness. There is a debate whether there is a separate translation studies perspective where Indian translation is concerned, and there's this article called "Is there a distinct Indian school of translation studies" by Sachin Ketkar. You can read it. Why do we need to look at translation from a distinct Indian lens? Because we are, coming out from a colonial space, and we are looking at translation as an act to decolonize our minds from the Western colonial biases to handshake a truly Indian tradition. And that is why we look at translation, because we are looking at the Indian translation context. And here are some very significant names: Devi GN, P. Lal, Sujit Mukherjee, who has so many different books, Balchandra Nemade, Niranjana Tejaswini, Avadesh Kumar, Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak, her essay Politics of Translation, and our resource person Udaya Singh ji also has a lot of contributions in this regard by Indian translation. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I have just briefly given you the tip of the iceberg. The paper is running into 20 pages. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Glenis, and sorry for hurrying you up. Now I invite Ms. Salima Kothare. She's going to speak about my favorite topic, translating drama, some insights into theory and praxis.
Firstly, thank you, ma'am, for two things. One, for letting me present this paper. That's a formal one. And the second, for telling me that that's your interesting topic, and that makes me feel fantastic now. And as ma'am said in the beginning of the session, post-lunch, I am not going to give you any audio-visual apart from my audio, and no visual. This is the only visual, so I am just making a plain paper presentation. I'll try to be within the time, maximum. Translating dramas, some insights into theory and praxis. I'm briefly actually touching upon a few things, not really going in depth. Literature written in any language is a mode of communication, a tool for creative exploration in knowledge and cultural expansion. The process through which literature of any genre crosses the borders of the language of its origin is translation. Translation has been derived from two Latin words, trans and latum, meaning a carrying across or a bringing across. In other words, it means carrying across the message between languages from one text to another. That is, how is it known that SL, source language, to the TL, the target language. Translation is the communication of the meaning of a source language text by means of an equivalent target language text. And as been mentioned off and on, it involves the transfer of aesthetic, cultural, psychological, and historical concepts from one language to another. Well, translation is considered essential for the growth of national as well as local literature and culture by bringing the great wealth of literatures and cultures from foreign lands. When we translate the great masters of world literature, like Tolstoy, Kafka, Ibsen, Shakespeare, Tagore, Kalidas, and numerous others, we enrich our own knowledge base. Well, the different genres of literature undergo a linguistic and cultural exchange, no doubt. However, translations for theatre may take different forms. Drama is said to be the most complex and the multidimensional of all the literary genres. It's complex because It is simply meant to be read like a poetry or at times read like a novel, but it's written for the production in the theatre. Drama, unlike other genres of literature, is only realized in performance. It's a theatrical craft. A drama is seen as well as heard. As a drama is seen, we have to keep in mind its visual elements, setting, costumes, the movement of actors, their gestures and expression. And as a play is also heard, the dialogue must have the necessary rhythm, intonation, voice modulations, speed of delivery, and also the pauses. The entire play may be translated, in which case the translation takes place of the source text in the production on stage. Thus, the aim or the mission of a translator of a dramatic work is slightly different from any other literary piece. The reason being, the translator has to bear in mind that there are readers and there is the audience. They'll not only follow the written form of the script, but also its spoken version. This fact influences the work of the translator to a great extent. Well, this paper attempts to explore the theoretic and practical aspects of translating dramatic works from one language to another, with a focus on the challenges and the considerations specific to translating plays, scripts, and other form of dramatic literature. Translating drama, as any other genre, also involves a complex interplay between theory and practice. Now, there are various theoretical approaches which are an essential requirement of any study, but this paper is discussing theory, translation as a theory, in light of a few select critical approaches, primarily focusing on Peter Newmark. When it comes to critical approaches, various scholars and theorists have contributed valuable insights. And as we just now saw, the previous paper presenter has given us a detailed historical overview. The historical perspective has been of different theories, and if I may follow George Stener's in After Babel, who divides the literature on theory, practice, and history of translation into 4 periods. His first period extends from the statements of Cicero and Horace on translation to the publication of Alexander Titler's Essay on Principles of Translation in 1791. Well, the emphasis on that is immediate empirical focus, where the statements and theories about translation stem directly from the practical work of translation. So, according to Horace and Cicero, a judicious interpretation of the source language text to produce the target language version was very important for the translator. And yes, it should be based on the principle non verbum de verbo, sed sensum experimere de sensu, that is, not word to word, but sense for sense, and the responsibility was towards the target language readers. With the advent and development of printing, this translation process acquired new dimensions. And as we very well know through our history lessons, the great voyages of discovery, establishment of new theories in science, affected concepts of culture and society, and radically altered the perspectives, and the attempt of theorizing translation was undertaken. With Reformation also came radical changes in the theory of literature as well as in the role of translation. The second period is basically from 1791 to 1946, where 2 conflicting tendencies have been observed: the translator as a creative genius and translation as a mechanical activity of making a text known. This era also presented paradoxical views on translation, where Matthew Arnold and Longfellow insist on the total commitment to the source language. On the other hand, Edward Fitzgerald seeks to bring in a version of the source language text into the target language culture as a living entity. Well, the important advances in translation studies in the 20th century come from the groundwork done from groups in Russia in the 1920s, and subsequently by the Prague Linguistic Circle and its disciples. Interest in drama translation from a theoretical point of view started in the late 1970s, with the contemporary translation scholars initially highly influenced by semiotics, the base from which recent work has been able to proceed and develop. And if I divide them, or if it is divided into two, linguistic theories and literal theories of translation. Some of the influential theorists, I will just name them with a couple of sentences to them. Roman Jakobson, whose model of communication highlights the importance of different language functions, such as poetic, emotive, referential, and others. Eugene Nida, who's known for his work in dynamic equivalence, emphasizing the functional and the communicative aspects of translation. J.C. Catford, a major figure in linguistic approaches, who developed the concept of translation shifts. Peter Newmark, who is known for his classification of translation methods, particularly in his two books, Approaches to Translation and a Textbook of Translation. He distinguishes between two types, semantic and communicative translation. The semantic translation aims to convey the meaning of the source text, whereas the communicative translation focuses on the impact of the translation on the target audience. Well, in drama translation, Newmark's approach can be applied by considering both semantic accuracy and communicative effectiveness. This is crucial in capturing cultural and contextual elements present in the dramatic text. He argues that successful translation requires maintaining a linguistic correspondence between the source and the target text, ensuring that the meaning of the original is accurately conveyed. Translators must therefore strike a balance between preserving the semantic content and adapting the expression to achieve the desired communicative impact in the target language. This brings us to the praxis. The praxis in translation, drama translation, requires a multifaceted approach through various critical lenses who have emphasized different aspects. Various critics and various scholars who have contributed. Over here too, I would just briefly touch upon a few of them. Walter Benjamin, a German literary critic, who explored the concept of loss in translation. George Steiner, a literary critic discussing the challenges of translating poetry and drama. Lawrence Venuti, a translation theorist, who introduced the concept of domestication and foreignization. Julia Kristeva, a literary theorist who explores the notion of foreignness in translation. She argues that foreignness of the source text can enrich the target culture by introducing new linguistic and cultural elements. There are many more too, but coming down to Susan Bassnett, a translation studies scholar who has emphasized on the socio-cultural context of translation. She looks at translation as a form of intercultural communication and highlights the role of power dynamics in the translation process. Her work encourages a focus on cultural adaptation and mediation. Well, these critics have significantly shaped the field of drama translation by offering theoretical frameworks, insights, and methodologies. And of course, it helps us understand the complexity which are involved in translating dramatic works across cultures and languages. Drama translation presents a unique set of challenges that go beyond the typical complexities of translation in literature. I'll touch upon three main challenges. I'll touch on the three main challenges which are faced by a translator. One is the use of dialects or variants of language. Another one is, the problems of equivalence and finding certain words or phrases where there is no exact equivalence found in the target language, because at times the source language word may express a concept which is totally unknown in the target culture as such. So this particular kind of translation or this particular challenge which the translator faces is one thing which is very significant. That brings us to the third and the last point, that is translated cultures. In the words of Lotman, no language can exist unless it is steeped in the context of culture. And no culture can exist which does not have at its center the structure of natural language. Translation for this stage is predominantly a cross-cultural communication which must be made both on a linguistic basis and a cultural one, because language and culture are so interdependent that one implies the other. With this, I would like to conclude my paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Salima. And now, Ms. Rama Murkunde is going to present her paper. In commerce, there is a term called when your product is not complete, it is called work in progress. Rama is a doctor in work in progress. She just defended her PhD recently.
नमस्कार. या सत्राची अध्यक्ष श्रीमती प्रशांती तळपणकर, हेर प्रपत्र मांडपी सगळे जे माचयेर बशिल्ले आसा, सभाघरांत बशिल्ले सगळे मानादी, तुमकां सगळ्यांक हांव रमा मुरकुंडे नमस्कार करता. म्हज्या प्रपत्राचो माथाळो आसा कोंकणींतल्यान अणकारी कथनात्मक साहित्य आनी हाजो अभ्यास हांवें भास विज्ञानाच्या आधारान केल्लो आसा, जो तुमच्या मुखार हांव मांडटा. मनशाक सैमा कडल्यान मेळिल्ली एक मोलादीक देणगी म्हळ्यार भास, आनी तातूंतल्यान आमी आमचे विचार, आमचे उमाळे व्यक्त करतात. आतां एका समूहांत जेन्ना आमी रावतात एक भास पुरो जाता, पूण आमी एका समूहान काय रावना, वेगवेगळे भाशीक समूह आसा, आनी ताका लागून आमच्या मुखार दोन पर्याय आसा. एक, दुसऱ्याची भास शिकून घे, किंवा अणकारपी लागता जो एकट्याचे आयकतलो आनी दुसऱ्याक ताच्या भाशेन सांगतलो. आनी अणकाराची सुरवात खंयच्यान सुरवात जाल्ली आसा जी आमी आजतागायत चलयतात, आनी अणकाराची गरज तेन्नाच्यान पडल्या. मनशान आपले विचार, आपले उमाळे जे आसा ते साहित्यांतल्यानय मांडिल्ले आसा. आनी साहित्य पयलीं आदी मौखीक आशिल्लें, मागीर लिखीत, छापील अशी प्रगती आमी उदरगत आमी करत आयिल्ली आसा. आपल्या भाशेंत जे साहित्य आपणें रचलां तें आपलें एक्सप्रेशन आपल्याक सांगपाचें आसता म्हणून रचता, पूण हें दुसऱ्याकूय कळचें हें जेन्ना दिसता तेन्ना तें साहित्य अणकारा मार्फत दुसऱ्या भाशेक पावता. कोंकणीच्या संदर्भान जर मी विचार केलो, एका काळाचेर ती बोली म्हणून तिका हिणसायताले, ते आज राजभास आनी संविधानाच्या 8वे वळेरे म्हणसर तेणें मजल गाठली. हें सगळें जाल्या उपरांत ह्या भाशेंत आशिल्लें जें साहित्य आसा तें हेर भासांनी पावोवपाचें काम अणकारप्यांनी केलें. आनी हें जें साहित्य अणकारिल्लें आसा ताचो अभ्यास थोडोसो हांव भास विज्ञानाच्या आधारान तुमच्या मुखार मांडटा. सो भास विज्ञान म्हणजे कितें, हांव फूल डेफिनेशन्स किंवा सगळे व्याख्या सगळ्यो मांडपाचें ना, एकूच सादी सोपी सांगपाचें जाल्यार विज्ञानीक नदरेन केल्लो भाशेचो अभ्यास हाका भास विज्ञान म्हणटात. हाजे मुखेल बुनयादी फाटे आसात नाद विज्ञान, स्वनिम विचार, पदविचार, वाक्य विचार, अर्थविज्ञान आनी संकेत प्रयोग विन्यास. हाका इंग्लिशीन फोनेटिक्स, फोनॉलॉजी, मॉर्फॉलॉजी, सिंटॅक्स, सिमॅन्टिक्स आनी प्रॅग्मॅटिक्स ह्या नांवान आमी वळखतात. आतां ह्या स फाट्यांचो उपेग करून कशे तरेन मांडिल्लें आसा, म्हणजे कशे तरेन हो अभ्यास केल्लो आसा तें सांगूंक सोदता हांव. अभ्यास मांडपा खातीर हांवें जे स्त्रोत वापरल्यात, सोर्सीस आसात ते अशे आसा. हांवें जयंती नायक हांणी बरयल्लो बसवो ही कथा घेतल्या, जी विद्या पै हांणी बसवो कोंकणी स्टोरी म्हणून अणकारल्या. आगोस्तिनो पिंटो हांणी बसवो द नंदी बुल ह्या माथाळ्या खाली इंग्लिशीत अणकारल्या. दामोदर मावजो हांची भुरगीं मगेली ती ही कथा माधव बोरकार हांणी मुनती म्हाजी ह्या नांवान अणकारल्या. जाल्यार झेवियर कोता हांणी दीज आर माय चिल्ड्रन ह्या नांवान अणकारल्या. शिला कळमकर हांची मॅगी ह्या कथेचो अणकार मुकेश थळी हांणी मॅगी ह्या नांवानूच केल्लो आसा. मीना काकोडकर हांचे सुकण्या पिलारे ही कथा किरण पोपकार हांणी रेज रुंगन ह्या नांवान अणकारल्या. महाबळेश्वर सैल हांची हावटण ही कादंबरी विद्या पै हांणी द किल्न ह्या नांवान अणकारिल्ली आसा. आनी कार्मेलीन ही मराठी आनी हिंदीत अणकारिल्ली आसा. मराठीत नरेश कवडी आनी जाल्यार हिंदीत नारायण शेजवलकर हांणी अणकारिल्ली आसा. हे सगळे स्रोत आसा. हातूंतले एक दोन एग्जाम्पल घेवन तुमकां सांगता. सगळ्यात पयली जी देख घेवंक सोदता ती स्वनाची लागसाण. एखादो नाद वा एखादें उतर दुसऱ्या म्हणजे मूळ भाशेंतलें एखादें उतर आनी मोग भाशेंतलें एखादें उतर नादाच्या पातळेचेर जर लागसाण दाखयता, नादाच्या पातळेचेर स्वनाच्या पातळेचेर लागसाण दाखयता जाल्यार गडबड जावं येता काय कितें हो मुद्दो घेवन हावडणांतली देख आसा, वाक्य आसा मूळ टेक्स्टांतलें, कोंकणीत आसा, तुमच्या तळ्यांत म्हसरा पडटात म्हूण तुमची माती शेणाची, हेराल्या पोळ्यांक बुराक जाल्यार तुमच्या तव्याक बुराक. एक फकाणां करपाक धजे मारपाक म्हूण ते म्हणटा लोकांच्या पोळ्याक बुराक पडटा. पोळ्याक बरें पीठ आमलें काय बुराक येता, लोकांच्या पोळ्याक बुराक तुमच्या तव्याकूच बुराक अशें तुमचे तवे पाड हें सांगपाचें आसा. अणकार जाला तो असो, द पॉटर्स फ्रॉम नेबरिंग विलेज ऑफन टीज देम सेइंग पीपल हॅव डिम्पल्स ऑन देअर चिक्स बट युअर पॉट्स अँड पॅन्स हॅव पिट्स अँड होल्स. आतां ही गडबड कित्याक जाल्या जाल्यार पळो आनी पलो आतले ल आनी ल हे जे स्वन आसात. आता कांय कडेन आमी बांबोळेचे बांबोली करता, चलता. पाळोळेचे पालोले म्हळें जाल्यार तरी तूं थंयच पावता. पूण दर वेळा हे वांगडी स्वन एलोफोन्स कशे कोंकणीत चलनात. आनी हे जर जाण अणकारप्याक जर ना ताका दिसता की दर वेळा लच्या जाग्यार ल वापरल्यार चलता जाल्यार ही गडबड जावं येता स्वनाच्या लागसाणेक लागून. दुसरें एक उदाहरण आसा कार्मेलीनांतलें आसा. उतर वाक्य सांगता, जुजे कडेन उलयतना ते घाळ जाताले, कार्मेलीन घाळ जाताले. बेलिंदा स्वताच्या धुवेक बेलिंदाक सांबाळटना ते घुस्पताले. आनी फुडें वाक्य आसा, हांगा सुद्दां गरज ना मुखार वता. मराठीत आयला अणकार, जुजेशी बोलताना ती घायाळ होत होती, बेलिंदाला सांभाळताना ती गोंधळत होती. हिंदीनी त्यांचा जुजे से बात करते समय वह घायल सी हो जाती थी. घाळ उतर, घाळ आणि घायल हातू भितर म्हणजे नादाच्या पातळेचेर तुमी जर पळोवशात जाल्यार मातशी लागसाण दिसता. आनी अणकारप्यान जर हांगा बारीकसाण दवरुना की एका भाशेची फोनॉलॉजी स्वनेम विचार आनी दुसऱ्या भाशेचे स्वनेम विचार जरी एक सारके स्वन घेतले तरी तांचे कॉम्बिनेशन वा ताचो अर्थ वेगळो जाता हें जर लक्षात घेवना जाल्यार अश्यो चुकी जावं येता. आतां अणकारपी जेन्ना एका भाशेंतलो मजकूर दुसऱ्या साहित्य स्पेशली व्हरता, कांय उतरां अशीं आसता जी आशय घनीत आसता वा त्या स्पेसिफीक भाशे पुरती आसता. हांव सांस्कृतीक आशय घनता आशिल्लीं उतरां चडशीं घेना, तरी पूण कांय उतरां आसा जी त्या भाशेक स्पेसिफीक आसता आनी अशीं उतरां थोडीं अणकारप्यान मोग भाशेंतली व्हेल्लीं आसा आनी ताका लागून मोग भाशेंत भर पडटा ती कशी पळया. भुरगीं मगेली ती हाजें एग्जांपल घेता हांव. फक्त उतरांच घेता, वाक्यां न्हय. रोजालीन माय उतर हें आमकां कोंकणीत स्पेसिफीक आसा, माय. मागीर हियर बाबा, हियर्स युअर वॉटर, बाबा. मागीर मेड सम मॅक्रल पारा, एक वाक्य आसा तातूंत की बांगड्याचो पारो करून ती हाडून दवरता खुता खातीर म्हणून. मागीर फुडलें वाक्य आसा डोंट वरी बाय, आमी बाय म्हणटात, आगो बाय ह्या अर्थान. आनी एक वाक्य आसा श्रीमती रोजालीन फर्नांडीस, इज दॅट यू. श्रीमती सारकें उतर इंग्लिशींत आनी व्हेल्लें आसा. मिसेस सहज म्हणपा जाताले, मिसेस वापरपा जाताले, पूण अशें लॅक्सिकल म्हणजे उतरां ही मोग भाशेंतूय व्हेल्लीं आसा. मराठीतूय वाचूंक मेळटा. सगळंच वाचून दाखवायला हवं का माय. रोजालीन बल्कावर बसकण मारली. मागीर दिनीस गेल्या पासून कडी तर एका दिवसा आड शिजायची. कडी आनी शीतकडी आमचे सामकें निजाचें, त्या शिवाय आमकां जायना. आज म्हजो मंगळार आशिल्ल्या कारणान म्हाका कडी सोडची पडली, म्हणटकूच आमकां कडी सामकी घट. सो अशीं उतरां व्हेल्लीं आसा. आतां उतरां व्हरप सहज चडशें जाता, पूण कुसां जीं आसा म्हणजे पदाच्या पांडाचेर विचार करत जाल्यार मेकळी रुपीमा आमी व्हरता. बंदी रुपीमा जी दुसऱ्याचेर अवलंबून आसता ती व्हरप, बाउंड मॉर्फिम्स व्हरप डिफिकल्ट आसता. जाल्यार बाउंड मॉर्फिम आतां शेळपें कान्न सारकें उतर म्हाका बसवान मेळटा. आनी आमी कान्न, फातर्पे कान्न, कुंकळ कान्न आमच्या देवी खातीर वापरता आनी स्वताची आयडेंटिटी सांगपाक हांव गोंयकान्न, पणजे कान्न अशें सांगता. जाल्यार कान्न हें उतर मराठी आनी हिंदीनूय व्हेल्लें मेळटा. शेळपे कान्न फक्त हिंदीन व्हरता आसतना शेळपे वाट्याचेर शेल्पे केल्लें आसा. लचे थंय ल केल्लें आसा. इंग्लिशींत दोन आमकां अणकार मेळटात हाजे. एक विद्यापैन केल्लो, एक अगस्तिनो पिंटोन केल्लो. अगस्तिनो पिंटो हांगा मातशेशे बदल करता आनी शेल्पे करीण वा कारणी अशें तरेन करता. विद्या पळय मात तें गॉडेस ऑफ शेल्पे अशे तरेन दवरता. हातून चूक काय ना, पूण बंदी रुपीमा व्हरपाचे हांवें प्रकार पळोवन नाशिल्लो, म्हज्या वाचनात नाशिल्लो, हेरांच्या वाचनात आसूं येता, हांव ना म्हणिना, पूण बंदी रुपीमा व्हेलां हें पळोवन एक वेगळें दिसलें. वाक्य रचनेच्या पावंड्याचेर कोंकणी अशी भास आसा जी सब्जेक्ट ऑब्जेक्ट वर्ब आमी शेवटाक घेतात, आनी इंग्लीश आसा ती SVO सब्जेक्ट वर्ब ऑब्जेक्ट आशिल्ली भास आसा. हिंदी परत इंडो आर्यनान आशिल्ले कारणान SOV कडेन येता. आतां कोंकणीतलें एक वाक्य आसा मॅगीतलें, आनी ताजो पाय बेबदो, टिचर ताजी माय बाजारात नुस्तें, आनी तें वाक्य तोडटा. आनी सांगपाचें आसा की बाजारात माय नुस्तें विकता, पूण विकता हें म्हणनासतना इतल्याचेर सोडटा, आनी तें वाक्य पुराय जो तुमी पॅराग्राफ वाचशात अर्थ फुडें मुखार पावता. इंग्लिशीन तुमी हें करूं शकना. इफ तुमी जर म्हणत एंड यू नो टिचर हर फादर इज ड्रंकर्ड एंड हर मदर इतलें म्हळ्यार मदर वॉट फुडें कितें हर मदर फीश मार्केट अशें म्हणपाक जायना. इट विल साउंड व्हेरी अब्सर्ड. सो हर मदर सेल्स फीश इन द मार्केट हें फूल वाक्य म्हणचें पडटा. ही मोबा SOV पॅटर्नाच्या भासांक कांय कडेन घेवपाक मेळटा, सगळ्या वेळार न्हय, कांय कडेन, पूण SVO आशिल्ल्या भासांक मेळपाक अशी मोबा मेळप कठीण अशें दिसता. संकेत प्रयोग विन्यासान एकूच उदाहरण दिता. कोंकणीत वाक्य आशिल्लें की भुरगीं मगेली ती कथा आसा, तातूंत भितर रोजालीन जी आसा तिचे माड कातरपाक लोक आयिल्ले आसा, आनी जे आयिल्लो आसा कार्यालयांतले पत्र व्यवहार घेवन तो तिका विचारता, श्रीमती रोजालीन फर्नांडीस तूच काय म्हणून. मराठीत ताजो अणकार जाला, श्रीमती रोजालीन फर्नांडीस तूं. आतां कोंकणीन आमी तूं म्हणटात, इंग्लिशीनय यूच म्हणटात, पूण मराठींत एखादो परकी मनीस जर येवन एका बायलेक वा कोणाय मनशाक जर अप्रोच करता जाल्यार तुम्ही, आपण जर नसले जाल्यार एटलिस्ट तुम्ही तरी म्हणटा. आनी हे प्रॅग्मॅटिक्साचो हांगा लक्षांत घेवप गरजेचें आसता. सो जेन्ना अणकारपी आसता ताका कांय गजाली अणकारता आसतना लक्षांत घेवप ज्यो गरजेच्यो दिसल्यो, ह्यो भासविज्ञानाच्या आदारान केल्लो अभ्यास हो तुमच्या मुखार मांडला. निश्कर्शाचेर पावता. दर एका भाशेची स्वर्णीम व्यवस्था तिची खाशेली आसता. स्वन केन्ना केन्ना एकसारकेच जरी असले तरी कॉम्बिनेशन्स वेगळे आसूं येता. दोन वेगळ्यो भासो एकसारखे भाशीक नाद वापरता आसले जाल्यारूय दोनूय भासो एकेच रितीन सगळ्याच नादांचो उपेग करना. देखून मूळ भाशेंतल्यान मोग भाशेक अणकारतना अणकारप्याक मूळ भाशेची स्वर्णीम व्यवस्था फोनॉलॉजी समजून घेवप गरजेचें आसा, नाल्यार अणकारांत चूक येता. कोंकणी भाशेंत खूब कडेन उत्तर ळच्या जाग्याचेर ल वापरलें तरी प्रत्येक सिच्युएशनाक हे एलोफोन्स वांगडी स्वन कशें वापरनात हाचेर आनी अभ्यास जावपाची गरज आसा. पूण वापरनात हें कळटा. दर भाशेचें व्याकरण तेजें निजाचें आसता, तें समजून घेवप गरजेचें. एका भाशेंत एकवचनांत आशिल्लो उल्लेख दुसऱ्या भाशेंत आदरार्थी थंय करचो पडूं येता, आनी देखून ह्यो गैरसाणी लक्षांत घेवप गरजेचें आसा. अणकाराक लागून पदाच्या पावंड्यार मोग भाशेंत सांस्कृतीक आशयजनीत उतरांची भर पडटा. तशेंच कांय वेळार बंदी रुपीमाय मोग भाशेंत पावूं येता. हो म्हजो निश्कर्श आशिल्लो. तुमी म्हजी दोन उतरां आयकून घेतलीं, देव बरें करूं. आनी सगळ्या जाळवणदारांक हांगा म्हाका उलोवपाक संद दिल्ल्या खातीर, प्रपत्र म्हणपाक संद दिल्या म्हणून हांव तांचे उपकार आटायतां. देव बरें करूं.
देव बरें करूं रमाबाई. आतां आमी येदोळच्यान दोन पेपर थियोरी आनी हिस्ट्री पर्स्पेक्टीव पळयलो. आनी एक हिस्ट्रीचो पर्स्पेक्टीव आसा जो आमकां दिसपट्टो अजुनूय दिसता, आनी तो आमचें गोंयचें नातें पोर्चुगीज भाशे कडेन, लोकां कडेन. ताजेर रोशेल फर्नांडीस पेपर प्रेजेंट करतले. ब्रिजींग हिस्टॉरिकल नॅरेटिव्ह, द क्रिटिकल रोल ऑफ ट्रान्सलेशन इन अनरेवलिंग Portuguese Goan history.
Good day. I'm not going to talk about how important translation is because I think it's pretty obvious at this point. However, I just want to point out that in a society like Goa, where there is the presence of Konkani, Marathi, English and Portuguese, translation becomes indispensable because we are a multilingual society. My study delves into the examination of archival records from the Goa State Archive, which offer invaluable insights and serve as a fertile ground for scholarly inquiry. The waning proficiency in Portuguese and the complexities inherent in deciphering handwritten calligraphic scripts pose significant challenges for researchers endeavoring to access these historical narratives. As a researcher specializing in Portuguese Goan history, mastery of the Portuguese language is crucial for my research endeavors. Translation thus functions as a conduit, granting access to the wealth of knowledge contained within these handwritten documents. Although artificial intelligence tools such as Google Lens may facilitate translation of printed text, the intricacies presented by calligraphic writing necessitates the expertise of human translators. Although that being said, GPT-4 Vision demonstrates potential as an emerging AI solution. However, it must be noted that impediments faced by researchers in interpreting handwritten records are not solely linguistic in nature. Factors such as physical degradation, including ink smudges, insect damage, torn pages, and missing words further complicates the interpretive process. In instances where researchers are able to discern preliminary context despite these obstacles, the presence of physical deterioration significantly amplifies the complexity inherent in interpretation. If you look at the screen, I don't know how visible it is, figure 1, right on top towards the left, it'll show you that there are ink smudges on the page. And when I tried translating it using Google Lens, which is figure 2 at the bottom, it doesn't really help because Google Lens cannot identify this calligraphic writing style. However, expert human translator gave me that on the other side. That's not me. I'm not the expert human translator. I outsourced it. In instances where ink smudges render words illegible or moth and insect damage results in partial erasure of letters, scholars face the onerous responsibility of deciphering fragmented data. The exacerbation of this challenge, due to torn pages, demands novel methodologies to assuage the ramifications of physical degradation on the comprehensibility of historical documents. As you saw on the previous slide, because they were handwritten documents, Google Translate could not work. However, this was an article in Portuguese, but it's printed. So I didn't need to outsource this. I could just use AI. Embarking on my research journey into slave-like labor relations, the critical role of archival work and translation unfolded vividly during my exploration of the Goa State Archive. Navigating through Portuguese documents initially proved daunting, compelling me to request the aid of friends proficient in the language. Collaborating with them daily allowed for a meticulous combing through of historical records related to adoption and slavery. My focus on adoption practices and slavery was due to my study of the treatment meted out to the Poski in colonial Goa. Many of you may already know, but the Poski were unwanted, orphaned, or illegitimate children informally adopted by elite Goan Catholic families during the Portuguese rule. Derived from the Konkani verb posung, meaning to raise or to feed, often used in reference to cattle, these Poski were denied rights, education, and inheritance and were forced into domestic servitude. Marriages were discouraged and socializing outside acceptable spaces was rare. Unable to legally adopt due to the restrictions placed by Portuguese law, Goan Catholic families informally adopted these children under the guise of Christian charity, often camouflaging illicit affairs, where the illegitimate child adopted into the family was often related to a member of that very family. Some adopted children, called pefiliar in Portuguese, were treated equally, married, and given an inheritance. Although the terms Poski and pefiliar are both used to refer to adopted children, their connotation seems to differ. The term Poski carries a derogatory connotation, prompting people in contemporary Goa to avoid using it when referring to adopted children. Moreover, individuals spoken to often use the word Poski interchangeably with that of the Portuguese word crioulos, a word that, according to British Asian writer Selma Carvalho, was linked to North American slaves of African descent. This term, intertwined with the local Goan context, adds a layer of complexity to the study of the Poski. Perhaps the informal adoption of the Poski as servants rather than as children to be nurtured and cherished, and their subsequent exploitation as unpaid labor did not seem particularly wrong, given that they were being equated with slaves. A pastoral letter written by the then Portuguese Archbishop in Goa, José de Vieira Albanaz, in 1946 to to the clergyman of the Archdiocese of Goa, Daman and Diu, touches upon the rights of the criolage in families. He informs that the criolage were treated like slaves, highlighting what he calls the existence of the remains of disguised slavery, where subordinates were denied inalienable rights, like the rights to set up their own homes. Alvarez clarifies that he is referring to the institution of maintaining criolage with a specific local connotation that it carries, perhaps referring to the practice of maintaining posky in Konkani. This is possibly to clearly differentiate between other forms of criolage that operated in the Atlantic Ocean. Identifying this letter at the Goa State Central Library in Pato Panaji and obviously translating it into English was key to cementing the idea of the interchangeable use of the terms posky and criolage. There were hardly any references to the posky in historical writing, which led me to probe at records in the Goa State Archive, hoping to encounter criolage. However, I was able to identify pivotal documents pertaining to the legal adoption of children in Dhempe Taluka. I sought copies and engaged the services again of an expert translator. This crucial step facilitated the processing of information, allowing me to discern its significance. Exploring adoption deeds of Dhempe Taluka proved instrumental in solidifying my comprehension of adoption dynamics during the Portuguese rule, particularly the stark difference between Hindu and Catholic practices, where the documented Hindu adoptions served as a clear testament of the employment of legal restrictions prohibiting Catholics from formal adoption. However, it was not merely the documented evidence that spoke volumes. It was equally crucial to read the silence within the archive. This silence illuminated a poignant reality, where the void in the archive became a narrative in itself, pointing to a societal dynamic where Catholics informally adopted children. The consequence of such adoptions was often the vulnerability of these children, who, lacking legal protection, could end up as unpaid servants under the pretext of religious charity. Therefore, beyond the inked lines of Hindu adoption deeds, the unspoken narrative within the archive revealed a parallel world of informal Catholic adoptions. This nuanced understanding not only exposed the limitations imposed by the Portuguese rule, but also illuminated the often overlooked struggles of children who, informally adopted without legal safeguards, found themselves navigating uncertain paths, frequently ending up in roles as servants due to the absence of an established record of their adoption. After examining the extensive documents on slavery, which highlighted the time-intensive nature of the endeavor, the crux of my findings lay in the scrutiny of a slave registry. Timothy Walker's work from 2004 highlighted concerns about the reliability of the 1855 slave registry, citing intentional gaps in records to give a false sense of completion. Walker's scrutiny of the 1855 anti-slavery policy and its implementation in Portuguese India reveals a profound discrepancy. Despite the official call for slave registration, perhaps to eventually free these slaves, the census registration books from the Goa State Archive, overseen by Xavier, offer a disconcerting reality. Across all 9 provinces in Portuguese India, which encompasses Goa, Daman and Diu, a mere 134 slaves were officially registered. My discovery aligned with Walker's observations as I encountered a similar register of Tiswadi Taluka. This register purported to document details of all slaves in Tiswadi Taluka, yet only 16 individuals were documented, reflecting a glaring underrepresentation. Intentional blank spaces between records further echoed Walker's concerns about accuracy and veracity. Walker thus posits that the 1855 slave registry becomes an unreliable document due to potential collusion between colonial officials and slave owners. This collaboration, he suggests, served as a form of resistance to the royal anti-slavery policy, reflecting the pervasive legacy of racism in Portuguese colonial society. On examining the slave registry of Tiswadi Taluka, it was found that the names of registered slaves like Manuel, Maria, and Joaquim hint at the integration of slavery and slave ownership into the Goan ecosystem. Moreover, the intriguing classification of these individuals as servants in the registry adds complexity to their status. While slaves were univocally property, the term servant implies employment for domestic tasks, introducing nuances of value, consent, and treatment. This blurred distinction in the registry raises questions about the true nature of the labor relationships recorded. In this context, the emergence of terms like posky becomes pivotal. This term may have been coined strategically to perpetuate the institution of slavery under a different guise, informal adoption propelled by religious charity. The blurring of lines between slavery and servitude in the registry suggests a deliberate attempt to obfuscate the true conditions of labor, allowing for the continuation of exploitative practices under altered terminology. This historical moment thus becomes a tempting point to assume that the inception of terms like posky as tools to ensure the persistence of slavery and its subsequent forms of servitude. The intriguing connection between informal adoptions and post-abolition era practices among elite Goan Catholics unveils a complex interplay within societal structures. In the post-abolition landscape, where the need for free labor persisted, it becomes conceivable that individuals who were not officially registered as slaves during the 1855 anti-slavery policy could have found an alternative role as unpaid servants. This transition from the margins of official records to the informal realm allowed for a veiled continuation of labor exploitation within households. The prohibition on Catholic adoptions during Portuguese rule led to informal adoption practices, creating a potential link to the latter reliance on unpaid labor. Anecdotal evidence, such as the existence of African postcare, further strengthens this hypothesis. The term posky serves as a poignant illustration of how these individuals might have been strategically labeled within households. The disguise as informally adopted children not only obscured their true status as potential remnants of the pre-abolition slave system, but also facilitated their exploitation as unpaid servants. This interconnected narrative sheds light on the adaptive practices employed by the state and elite Goan Catholics to maintain opulent lifestyles in the aftermath of the abolition of slavery. The nuanced understanding of informal adoptions, intertwined with the exploitation of individuals who escaped from formal slave registration, adds a layer of complexity to the historical dynamics, really revealing the resilience of exploitative practices in the face of evolving societal norms. In essence, my research, grounded in translation and archival work, unveiled crucial aspects of adoption and its possible connection to slavery in Goa. Without the aid of translation, accessing the treasure trove of information in Portuguese would have been insurmountable, underscoring the indispensable role translation played in shaping the completeness and accuracy of my study. The implication for researchers, particularly those grappling with the intricacies of handwritten documents in historical research, highlights the importance of employing interdisciplinary methodologies. Conservation efforts, advanced imaging technologies, and collaboration between historians, archivists, and preservation experts becomes indispensable in mitigating the adverse effects of physical degradation. Furthermore, the utilization of digital restoration techniques may offer avenues for reconstructing obscure or missing portions of text, thereby enhancing the overall interpretability of degraded documents. In navigating these multifaceted challenges, researchers must advocate for comprehensive strategies that integrate linguistic expertise with technological advancements and preservation methods. Addressing the intricacies of deciphering degraded handwritten records not only ensures the preservation of historical knowledge, but also highlights the resilience and adaptability required in the pursuit of meaningful historical scholarship. In conclusion, the title of my paper, Bridging Historical Narratives, attempts to suggest that through the act of translating documents from the Goa State Archive and utilizing them, this research serves as a connection between different historical perspectives and creates a link that allows for a more comprehensive understanding of Portuguese Goan history. It emphasizes the role of translation as a bridge that facilitates the flow of historical information across linguistic and cultural boundaries, contributing to a more unified and inclusive narrative. Thank you.
Thank you, Rochelle. And now the floor is open for questions. One करू काय विचारतात प्रश्न? No questions? I know none of you all were sleeping out, so सगळ्यांचे डोळे पळयताले, कोण मोबाईलय पळयनाशिल्लो. You all were listening, so there must be some questions. असं प्रश्न असतात. तुमकां ह्या चौगांनी धमकी बी दिल्या प्रश्न विचारप ना म्हणून? अशें कितें तरी आसतलें.
Rochelle, कोंकणी उलयलें
Right. Okay, I will ask in English. Every time you were referring to post-care, because post-care is feminine. Post-care. But but you were also referring to, I thought it was only a female servant. No. There were also males? There were. Okay, that was a little.
Post-care is also plural of post-care. Yes, I am. That's the way it was said. It's not a question as such.
Not really a question as such. Wonderful session. None of us slept. And especially माझं प्रपत्र खूप शिकपाक मेळ्ळें तातूंतल्या बाकीच्याय प्रपत्रांतल्यान शिकपाक मेळ्ळें बट आय थिंक लिंग्विस्टीक इज समथींग is a field where I get a little scared to venture into. But it was very interesting that you chose linguistics to analyze translation, and then as a translator we realize how important it is to look into these aspects which may look minor but are so important, especially Paul example. My question is about कुसांच्या संबंधान कारण म्हाका PhD करतना बी ma'am might also remember we had this discussion for one of the DRCs. Ma'am was pointed it out, like Zagor, for example, term आशिल्लो. So whether to use Zagoraचे Englishin वापरतना Zagors can be used in plural form काय Zagor. So like because Englishin usually when we plural कितें तरी वापरता तेन्ना ताका s जोडटा खुबशे. So I think I had used Zagors at some point, so we still didn't get an answer to that question. If you would like to comment on that particular aspect, translate from Konkani, especially cultural terms, कच्चे काय ते तसेच retain करचे. What is your view about that?
सांस्कृतिक आशय घनता आशिल्ली उतरां जी आसा कल्चरल टर्म्स जे आसा कांय वेळा मोग भाशेंतल्यान मूळ भाशेंतल्यान मोग भाशेंत वतना कल्चर जर लागींचो आसत जाल्यार मेळूं येता त्या वेळाचेर मोग भाशेंतले वापरचे पूण जर मोग भाशेंतले मेळच ना आतां मंगळसूत्र सारकें उतर आसा कुसां जी उतरां जाल्यार हांव म्हणटलें घरची कुसां म्हाका दिसता ती स्पेसिफीक आनी त्या टेक्स्टाक पळोवन थारोवची पडटली म्हणजे तुमी एक असो नियम काडलो आनी सगळ्याक लायलो जशें आमी सायन्सान म्हणटा की O2 म्हणजे ऑक्सिजन हें तुमी भाशे कडेन करपाक शकना केस टू केस करची अशें मत म्हजें आसा की केस टू केस करप योग्य जातलें म्हणून कारण एक नियम काडून सगळ्यांक एकाच हाच्यात कशी घालतली आनी इंग्लिशीन सुद्दां दर वेळा आमी एसूच वापरता अशेंय बी ना न्ही तुमी वेगळ्या तरेन कितलेशेच आतां फुटाचे हांव फुट्स म्हणत जाल्यार सगळें हांसतलीं म्हाका हांगा म्हणजे हांसतलीं न्ही फुटाचे फुट्स म्हणत जाल्यार सो वेगळी वेगळी कुसां इवन इंग्लिशीनय वापरिल्लीं आसा सो त्या प्रमाणे निर्णय घेवचो अशें म्हाका दिसता हें म्हजें मत
जागोर स्पेसिफीक
It is a very relevant thing. प्रश्न विचारलो तातूंत दोन गजाली आयल्यो एक कितें थोडे उतरांचे कोंकणीन एकवचन आसते अनेकवचन तशेंच उरता जागर जागोर थोडे लोक ताका जागोर म्हणटात आनी ताजे प्लुरलय जागोर जाता पूण कितें कोंकणीन ते असले किंवा एक सुप्त ओ आसता न्ही तेन्ना प्लुरलान ताजो उच्चार वेगळो जाता एक आसता जागर दुसरें आसता जागर तो ओडून येता हें इंग्लिशीन दाखोवप शक्य नासता ताका लागून ते एस घालून स्पेसिफाय करतात पूण पोस्की सारके उतर ताका हें लागू पडना कित्याक ते ऑलरेडी ते प्लुरल वापरतात फक्त ताका जेन्ना विभक्ती लायतले म्हणजे कूस लायतले तेन्ना ते पोस्कीचें अशें करूंक मेळचें ना ते पोस्क्याचें पोस्क्यांचें अशें जाता इवन इफ इट इज पोस्की विभक्ती एंड नंबर आर डिफरंट ताका लागून दॅट इशू टू बी रिसॉल्व
ना म्हजो हातून एकच क्वेरी परत आसा मॅमीन एक्सप्लेन केलें तें जागर इज अ कन्सेप्ट सो तो कलेक्टीव न्ही कलेक्टीव सो तो जागोर्स कित्याक करप तो जागोरूच दवरप इट्स अ कन्सेप्ट न्ही, आमी खूब वेळा कन्सेप्ट कलेक्टिव्ह कन्सेप्ट आसता न्ही, ताका हेच लायना. हय ना, पण म्हणजे पिपल्स म्हणनात न्ही आमी. सो म्हणजे जेन्युइन म्हणजे की इट इज कलेक्टिव्ह जेन्ना आसता तेन्ना हेच लावपाची गरज आसता काय.
कलेक्टिव्ह म्हणजे कितें म्हणटा, फॉर्म कलेक्टिव्ह काय नाउन कलेक्टिव्ह?
फॉर्म कलेक्टिव्ह.
फॉर्म कलेक्टिव्ह अशे तरेची खुबशीच ताजी फॉर्मां किंवा उपप्रकार असतात अशें सांगचे आसतना एस लावचे पडटा. हे रेअरली लागता. पळय, पीपल्स ऑफ द वर्ल्ड अशें म्हणटात आमी. मोस्टली पीपल इज एक तूं सांगता तसलो शब्द, आनी त्या शिवाय जागर वेगळो कित्याक इट्स अ प्रॉपर नाउन. सो ते चेंज जावपाची तशी गरज ना. बट फॉर द नीड ऑफ एक्सप्रेसिंग अ पर्टिक्युलर आयडिया इन अ फॉरेन लँग्वेज ते आमकां करचें पडटा.
Any other questions? So हांव जस्ट एक 5 मिनटांनी म्हजें वायंड अप करता. इंडिविज्युअल हें करना. पयलींच म्हणजे चौगूय पत्र जाणें सादर केलें तांकां चौगांकय परबीं, कारण सुंदर अशे प्रश्न तुमी मुखार मांडले, बॅकग्रावंड दिलो, आनी कांय गजाली ज्यो आमी अधोरेखीत करपाक जाय, अंडरलायन करपाक जाय, त्यो म्हणजे एक की आमची जी एज आसा ती ट्रान्झिशनल एज आसा. आमचे खुबशे आतां बदल जायत रावतात, आनी आमी विचार करूंक जाय की कितें आमी जेन्ना अणकार करतलीं तेन्ना वर्ड टू वर्ड करतलीं. कारण जशें डॉक्टर ग्लेनिसान सांगलें की वर्ड टू वर्डाच्यान जी सुरवात जाल्ली आनी जशें वेगळे वेगळे ताका अर्थ येवंक लागले, ताजी सेन्सिबिलिटी घेवपाची गरज पडली, ती आमी पळोवंक जाय. नाजाल्यार कितें जातलें, आतां हिंदीचेंच आमी पळया. हिंदीचें ट्रान्सलेशन जें जालां खूब वेळा एकदम जड शब्द वापरल्या, केन्ना केन्ना वर्ड टू वर्ड वापरल्या, आनी ती हिंदी आमकां समजत ना. सो आमचे कोंकणीचे तशें जावचें न्ही अशें म्हणून साद्या सोंप्या भाशेनच आमकां म्हणजे आमी ताजेर विचार करचो पडटलो. कारण ही ट्रान्झिशनल स्टेज. पयलीं कितें जालें वा कोणी आनी कितें केलें, कोंकणीन पयलीं अशें म्हणटाले म्हणचे परस आय थिंक आमी एक लक्षांत दवरूंक जाय, सादी सोंपी लोकांक समज सारक्या लोक भाशेनच आमकां काम करचें पडटलें. जे कोण अणकार करपाचे आसा ते एक्विवलन्स पळोवचें पडटलें. दुसऱ्या पेपरान जे सांगले ते ड्रामाच्या यूज ऑफ डायलेक्ट एक्विवलन्स आसपाक जाय आनी ट्रान्सलेटींग कल्चर करपाक जाय. हातून आमी एक लक्षांत घेवंक जाय, आमी कशें म्हणजे आतां कोणी तरी सांगलें की हांगा हिंदी, मराठी, कोंकणी, इंग्लीश, पोर्चुगीज आनी आतां आमी एक लक्षांत घेवंक जाय कन्नडी. सेन्सस जर लेटस्ट पळयत जाल्यार मायभास पयली कोंकणी आसा, दुसरी कन्नड आसा, दुसरी काय तिसरी, म्हणजे कन्नडी हांगा चड उलोवपाक लागले. सो आनी खूब वेळा कितें जाता, थिएटरांतले जेन्ना आमी ट्रान्सलेट करता तेन्ना आमी डायलेक्ट वापरूंक वता, पण तो कसलोय डायलेक्ट वापरतात. अणकार जेन्ना करता तेन्ना तें करप ना, ड्रामान करप ना, कारण तें मागीर पचपचीत जाता आनी हास्यास्पद जाता. म्हणजे हें कितें अशें जाता. तुका जर सारकेंच तो डायलेक्ट जाल्यार तो समजून घेवन शिकून घेवन करचो पडटलो, नाजाल्यार मागीर लोक हर्ट जाता, खूब हर्ट जाता. फॉर एग्जाम्पल आमी ते बॉम्बेची इंग्लीश म्हणून जी ट्रान्सलेट करता, कितलेच लोक मागीर तांकां वायट दिसता, कारण ती सारकी करना. सारके नुएन्सेस कितें आसा तांचे, कशे उच्चार आसा, कशे ते उलयतात, हें सगळें करपाक जाय. अदरवायज देन द ड्रामा फेल्स. म्हाका याद आसा दुसरे कल्चरल कॉन्टेक्स्टांतल्यान आमी खंयच्यानय भायर सरतना येता गे म्हणटात. आवयक सांगतना येता गे म्हणटा. म्हजे कडेन एक ड्रामा आयिल्लो, तातूंत आशिल्लें ही सेड ही इज कमिंग बॅक. आनी म्हाका प्रश्न पडलो की डायरेक्ट करतना म्हणजे तुवें म्हळां की यू हॅव सेड दॅट ऑडियन्स आसता, वाचक आसता आनी एक्टर्सूय आसता. एक्टर्सांक जर तें ट्रान्सलेशन थिएटरांतलें सारकें जावंक ना न्ही, इतलो प्रॉब्लेम जाता, म्हणजे खूब प्रॉब्लेम जाता. सो हे नॉयन्सीस आसा ते समजून घेवंक जाय, ते कल्चरल रेफरन्सूच समजून घेवंक जाय, ना जाल्यार कितेंय ड्रामा जावपाक शकता. आणि एक कोंकणीन आमच्या, म्हणजे म्हाकाय खबर नाशिल्लें, आमी म्हणटात भायर सरले म्हणून. भायर सरले खूब कडेन कपडे न्हेसून रेडी जावप, म्हाका भायर. बट जाणे कोणी ट्रान्सलेट केलें न्ही, ताका तें खबर नाशिल्लें, ताका भायर सरले म्हणजे वेंट अवे. ताका एक मनशाक दुसरें विचारता, भायर सरले तूं म्हणजे रेडी जालें तूं. दॅट पर्सन कोण ट्रान्सलेट करता ताका कळोंकूच ना, ताणें म्हटल्यार शी वेंट अवे. सो अशा वेळार म्हणजे स्पेशली हे ड्रामा बिमा करतना तुका खूब दवरचें पडटा. रमाच्या हातून ताणें जे रेफरन्सीस दिले तातूंत एक गजाल आमी खूब लक्षांत घेवंक जाय की अंदाजपंचे केन्नाच करप ना, कारण अंदाजपंचे केले काय खूबच प्रॉब्लेम जाता. म्हजे कडेन आनी एक ट्रान्सलेशन आयिल्लें. स्टोरी अशी आशिल्ली की बाबू सकाळी उठ्ठा, भायर पळयता ताका निळें निळें आभाळ दिसता, आवयची नदर चुकोवन तो भायर वचून खेळपाक लागता. बाबू गॉट अप. He thought, where is my mother? I must not tell her. He looks up. He looks at the sky. It is so blue. And he runs away and plays. हांव ताका विचारलें, त्या भुरग्याक आपयलें विचारलें, बाय हें कशें गो काय म्हणून. सो तें म्हणलें ना, तसोच अर्थ आसतलो न्ही ताजो. म्हटल्यार अर्थ आनी अणकार हें एक आसना. कारण म्हाका सदांच अशें दिसता, हांव नकळो तुमी कितल्या जाणांनी केलां, आमी ल्हान आसतना केलां. नाणें आसता न्ही, कॉयन घेतालीं आनी एक पातळ पेपर घेतालीं आनी ताजेर पेन्सील लायता आनी सारकें तें येता. आय फील अणकार तसो. आनी तो केन्ना स्मज जावपाक जायना, तो केन्ना सारको येवपाक जाय आनी तें सारकें कळपाक जाय. पण केन्ना केन्ना आमी अंदाज मारले, कल्चरल कॉन्टॅक्ट समजली ना, हार्ड वर्क, म्हणजे खूब वेळा आमकां काम करचें पडटा. म्हजे कोतान सगळ्यान व्हडलो रेफरन्स मटेरियल आमचे डिक्शनरी आसा, वेबसायट आसा, AI आसा, पण सगळ्यान व्हडलो आमचो रेफरन्स मटेरियल इज आमचे जाणटे लोक. तांचे कडेन उलोवपाक जाय, तांकां विचारूंक जाय, ताजो अर्थ विचारून घेवपाक जाय. चुडीत आमचे माड चुडीत बी आसा न्ही, ताका इतली वेगळी नांवां आसा. मुद्दाम म्हणजे जेन्ना पुंडलीक नायकाचें जेन्ना तुमी खंयचेंय लिखाण, कविता जावं, कथा जावं, ड्रामा ट्रान्सलेट करता तेन्ना जाणट्यांकच धरचें पडटा. महाबळेश्वर सैल कारवारच्याच जाणट्यांक धरचें पडटा, कारण दॅट इज इम्पॉर्टंट. तें करप ना, म्हाका डेडलायन आसा म्हणून कित्याक कितें केलें जाल्यार अणकाराचे 12 ब्रेस्तार आनी 13 शुक्रार जातले. रॉशेलाच्या पेपर मांडटाना म्हाका एक म्हणजे एक याद जाली. आमची एक लोकांकणी आसा की म्हातारे कितें सोदता, सूय सोदता आनी मागीर ती सांगत वता अमक्या खातीर तमक्या खातीर तमक्या खातीर. एक्चुअली पोर्चुगीजांतल्यान कोंकणीन वा कोंकणींतल्यान पोर्चुगीज जेन्ना आमी अणकार करता न्ही, तेन्ना शेणिल्ले शब्द, शेणिल्ल्यो काणयो, शेणिल्ले संस्कृती आनी खुबशे अंडरलायन जे करंट आसा ते मुखार येतात. आनी ह्या भाशेन जेन्ना कोणी अणकार करता तेन्ना तांणी सारकें अलर्ट रावचें पडटलें, कारण हें फुडाराक वतलें न्ही, नाजाल्यार जें आशिल्लें तें वेगळेंच जातलें. सो ह्या नदरेंतल्यान हे जे 4 विचार हांवें तुमच्या मुखार मांडले. हांव एक्चुअली हांगा खूब जाण म्हज्याकय चड काम केल्ले आनी चड गिन्यानी लोक आसा. हांवें ही जी उतरां उडयल्या ती सगळ्या यंग भुरग्यां खातीर. अणकार हो सेकंडरी न्ही, अणकार हें मुख्यच काम, जबाबदारेचें काम, परकाया प्रवेश करून करपाचें काम, तें जबाबदारेन करचें. म्हाका हांगा मॉडरेटर म्हणून संदी दिली म्हणून हांव जाळवणदाराक देव बरें करूं.
That was really a very informative and enlightening session. Thank you. I would like to thank the moderator as well as the presenters for sharing their knowledge on different theories and different ideas to us. I would now like to request Shri Anil Sawant, Deputy Director, Directorate of Official Language, to present the mementos for the moderator and the presenters. Presenters Dr. Glenis Mendonça, Ms. Salima Kothare, Ms. Rama Murkunde, and Ms. Rochelle Fernandes. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone. We will now take a very short tea break. Please head back for tea, and we'll be back by 4. We are having a very short break. We'll come back at 4 for the next session. Thank you, everyone.